Hello, BookTube. Many months ago, Michael K. Vaughan over at stately Vaughan Manor, which may or may not be Arkham Asylum, uh, did a video in which he looked at some of the things that lurk on his Kindle, uh, meaning the things that you will know well if you have an e-reading device and spend any kind of time on it, which is that there are deals, there are sales, there are free books. Suddenly you find there's a ton of stuff on your e-reader. Suddenly it's not the carefully curated thing you once dreamt it would be. And I saw that video and loved it, of course, because I love ebooks, I love e-readers, and I'm intensely nosy. So it was the perfect storm. So I made a tag out of it, the What Lurks on Your Kindle tag. And a whole bunch of people did it, which was great. It satisfied my curiosity. I did a bunch of follow-up tags of my own on my own Kindle. And just recently, Ollie at CriminOlly, I'll leave links to these things to let you know what I'm talking about. Ollie did another look at his Kindle, more books that lurk on his Kindle, and I am hereby weaponizing that as well. This is the revenge of what lurks on my Kindle tag, and I want to stress here that this doesn't have to be a Kindle. Any e-reading device will do. What I want to know is show me 10 or 12 books that are on your Kindle. That's it. That's all you have to do the tag. You don't have to go on and on about them, as I will almost certainly go on and on about the books I'm going to show you now. But you don't have to do that. You can just show them to me. Because if I were magically endowed with the ability to transport myself and Frida to the room where you make your own videos, I would grab your e-reader out of your hand and start rummaging through it myself. I can't do that. So you have to facilitate that because I'm an incredibly powerful YouTube influencer. So we're going to go through some books that are lurking on my Kindle, but it's not my Kindle. It's my iPad Mini. Really a great form factor for reading and nice and bright. And this is a second generation iPad Mini. So it's kind of a weak machine. It doesn't connect to Wi-Fi very far from the modem, and it doesn't do much very quickly. It's been outmoded as an Apple device. So there are some apps that you can't load it onto this device even in their oldest available form. And that's okay with me. I realized, I was frustrated for a second when I realized that. Then I realized, no, that's perfectly okay with me. I can look things up on Google on this thing. I can check my email. I can do Voxer. You should all Voxer me. I'm a lonely old shut-in. And I can read on this thing. And without needing to worry about bezels. I don't need to worry about bezels, thick or thin, on this thing. I just palm it. So we're going to go through some of these, and we'll start with a book that is not a book. When is a book not a book? Batman, riddle me that. Annie Proulx did a story for the New Yorker called Brokeback Mountain. I remember reading it in the New Yorker. I remember vividly the illustration that came with it, and it's as you will know, it's the story of it was made into a famous movie that was written by Larry McMurtry and Annie Proulx, and is terrific. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal and the late Heath Ledger, and it's a terrific movie. And the movie it pads out the story quite a bit. There are fist fights and a bear, but the main story is the same, which is two men. When we first meet them, they're young, who are just part of the modern Western Chevy trucks, rodeos. You have a family, you work hard to support them, but you never tell them that you love them. You drink too much, that sort of thing. That kind of world, that kind of modern Western world that Annie Proulx captures fantastically well, not just in this story, but in all stories. And those two men take a gig for a season watching sheep up on a mountain, on Brokeback Mountain, and fall in love with each other. Neither one has ever thought about this before. They aren't just in love; they're in passionate lust with each other. It's the whole package. And it was made. It was a short story. It caught on with readers. They really liked it, and it was made into a movie. The movie is tremendously good. I strongly recommend it if you haven't seen it. And the takeaway, the emotional takeaway for me, the thing that I loved about both the story and the movie, was the sentiment expressed by one of the characters who said, if this thing comes over us when we're around other people and they see it, we're dead. It was that quick economic sentiment. This is a really well done story. That quick economic sentiment portrayed not only that the thing is sort of this alien force. That's how overpowering this kind of combination of love and lust can be. Any of you who have had the fortune/misfortune to feel it will know what I'm talking about. It completely overwhelms you. But also that sentiment reflects that there are plenty of places in the world, plenty of times in the world, where it simply can't happen, where you would die, you would be killed by your friends and neighbors if you experienced it. That is still true today in huge numbers of places in the world, and it's true in this story, and it gives the story an incredible tension. And when the movie was a hit, the publisher brought out Brokeback Mountain, just the story, as a tiny little paperback. Ordinarily, if that were the case, where a short story takes off like that, the short story collection would get rebranded. There'd be movie cover artwork, and it wouldn't be just that story. It would be all the other stories that had been in the original collection. But in this case, the publisher didn't do that. They just brought out a little book, a tiny pamphlet that's just Brokeback Mountain. That was the first thing that I found. Well, no, it actually wasn't the first thing that I found on my Kindle or my e-reader. But the process of arranging these things automatically alphabetizes them. I certainly don't do that. I'm not type A enough to alphabetize things. But the next thing here is a fairly new thing, and it's a behemoth of a book. It's like 1,000 pages long. The print book. The print book is lovely. It'll be in your bookstore still, and it's lovely. If you like that kind of thing, if you like a very pretty, well-made book, then this is right up your alley. But for me, infinitely an ebook. This is by Jay Kristoff. It's his new book, Empire of the Vampire. Once again, I want to stress this doesn't do justice. I mean, this is an ebook, so it's not taking up any space on the shelf. It's not uncomfortable to read on my chest or on my lap. It doesn't take up any space to put in my bag. It doesn't. I don't have to worry about it at all. I can annotate it to my heart's content. But the ebook here, in this case, does not do justice to the production design of the hardcover. Not at all. And it's an intriguing story. It's a vampire story, but it's a vampire story with an intriguing kind of premise. What would happen if night fell forever on Earth, or for long periods of time? So all of a sudden, the vampire's most besetting weakness was gone. What would happen? And what would that system look like after decades? I thought it was overwritten and slangy. It's very much a YA novel. It doesn't bill itself as that, but it's clearly steeped in that kind of tradition. It's a page turner. It will definitely hook you, but it's not great vampire literature. Not that there's much in the way of great vampire literature. But once again, I want to stress to you. I know that a lot of you aren't rogue, sexy vampire paladins, but I want to stress: don't hold your sword like that. That will cut you. That is a bad. I know it looks cool, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to put your sword over your shoulder like that. But I don't think I ever got the big ornate physical copy of this thing. I might want a copy of it if I were to see it. I bet I would probably get it for $1 at the Brattle. But I don't think I ever got this except as an ebook. Okay, oh, goodness gracious, we have another one. All right, this is by Amy Nixon. This is I think years old. I really liked it. It's called Ghouls and Alchemy. And once again, we have the hero holding his sword like that. Don't do that. That will hurt you. Even if it's not a double-edged sword, that will still hurt you. And this is a weird amalgam of fantasy and science fiction where dead soldiers are brought back to life to serve as, I guess, an unending secondary platoon of various powers, of the powers that be. And it's told first person by one of those characters who has a whole lot of other problems aside from that. And it's amazing. I remember really liking the way this book pulls you into its world building, which is usually the Achilles heel of stuff like this. I think this was independently published. And probably, for all I know, this author has 1 million books. Indie published authors who are publishing their own work, and therefore how much money they make in a month is largely a product of how much they hustle and whether or not they resonate with an audience. They tend to write a lot. I often imagine an alternate world, maybe even this world, where I did that, where I started a fantasy or a science fiction or even a mystery series or a romance series and self-published it, found somebody to do cover artwork that was on the cheap but looked good, and then just kept pumping these things out. I would tell you about them So you could download the dollar ebook on Amazon or whatever, and you might have a series that I write that is one of your favorites, and then one that you don't like so much. And I would just keep doing that. I've had friends of mine, including two self-published authors, two indie authors, say, you barely ever sleep, and you write faster than anybody I've ever met. You could be making a huge amount of money doing this. You barely ever sleep. You write really fast. Your prose is readable. You don't need an editor except for mistakes, and you're really good at talking to an audience. Why not use that to talk about your own books? I've never done it, and here we're halfway through March in 2022, and I still haven't done it. But given that world, I'd be willing to bet that Amy Nixon has a whole bunch of other books, maybe other books in this series. This is the only one in this series that I've ever read, and I really liked it. What do we have next here? Okay, this next one is a name that will be known to you. I think this is a new book in America. This is Alison Weir, who is a historian who also writes historical fiction. And this is The Last White Rose, a novel of Elizabeth of York, who was the mother of King Henry VIII. The book here, the cover says The Last White Rose, a novel of Elizabeth of York. And Alison Weir wrote a book called Elizabeth of York. She wrote a nonfiction, a biography called Elizabeth of York. Same materials, same sources. Only this is her drawing on that to write a novel. And she's not the only one who does this. Carolee Erickson also does this. Just two parallel tracks, history and historical fiction, about the same characters, same time periods. And when you do that in books like this, it automatically throws the emphasis on your novel writing skills, right? We already know that Alison Weir can research this stuff because we've read her histories. She writes histories. She gets her histories published. So if she's going to write a novel about Elizabeth York, about whom she's written 2 books of nonfiction, then you don't have to think about the nonfiction parts of this book anymore, so to speak. You can concentrate completely on the drama, on the fiction parts. I've always thought that was a dicey gambit. For instance, Alison Weir's fictional abilities, her ability to craft a character, to craft a plot, not just to fictionalize her sources, the sources that she wrote a nonfiction work about the same characters about. Her ability to do that is not all that strong. Good enough to keep you reading, but it always makes me wonder why you would do this, why she would do this. Her histories are not demanding. Anybody who is interested in the Wars of the Roses or the birth of the Tudor dynasty could read one of her histories without straining themselves, even if they don't typically like history or biography. So why do this? I'd be curious. I should probably look around. Maybe she's addressed this question in interviews. What she gets out of doing this, I guess, is my question. What do you get out of doing this if you already have a loyal audience for doing this without the he said and she said? But anyway, the next one is, okay, this is a little bit blurry, but that's just as well. This is Flash Gordon. This is The Lion Men of Mong. The period cover there. There is Flash, typically without his shirt. There is Dale, and there is Ming the Merciless in the background. And this was a pulp science fiction mass market paperback that I had forever and ever. I think I have an ebook of this. I believe a lot of these original Flash Gordon novels are in ebook. I think you can get them, including with this original garish cover artwork, which I don't know who this is. I'm not sure. I think this cover artist probably did a lot of Tarzan and Korak. I'm recognizing the style, but I'm blanking on the name. But anyway, it's a Flash Gordon novel. The Flash Gordon is really, really bad science fiction, so you don't expect anything of it. Then we have really good science fiction, although by this point in the series, I'm not sure that it really was science fiction, more like fantasy. This is S.M. Sterling, and this is Meeting at Corvallis. And this is, I don't know if you can make it out, in the background there is a city bus being pulled by horses. And you have ruined skyscrapers in the background and a character in the foreground with chainmail and an axe. And that's because this is the 4th or 5th book in the Emberverse series by this author that I have praised many, many times. If you're looking for a science fiction series that will endlessly interest you, and you've missed this series, start with the novel Dies the Fire and just keep going. This is a world in which, it's our normal world in the late 1990s. people going about their business in the Pacific Northwest, when suddenly there's a flash of light in their minds, it feels like. And when that flash is intensely painful, but it's over before you can even feel it. And when it's over, all higher technology has stopped working. Planes fall out of the skies. Cars don't move. Railways, electricity, all of that. None of it works. And none of it can be made to work. And suddenly the whole world is thrown back on the Middle Ages, on medieval technology, horses, hand pumps, hand weapons, chainmail, outhouses, that sort of thing. And the first book, Dies the Fire, is the book where that happens, and it is just incredibly thought-provoking, just amazingly good. Plus, Sterling he is no slouch. He does not need to learn anything from Brandon Sanderson about how to write a big multi-character, completely meat and potatoes, basically space opera, although there's no science fiction. The science fiction, the only feint at it is in the beginning of Dies the Fire, when some characters are wondering, well, why doesn't gunpowder work? That's just chemical reaction. Why doesn't it work? It must be that someone is monkeying with the physics, which is a feint, I guess, at science fiction. The thought in the background, increasingly far in the background of the series, is what caused the change, what caused that to happen. But the characters are concerned only with living day to day. And in that first book, Dies the Fire, there are three real main characters. One is a folk singer who she never expected to be a leader or a community center or of any kind. The other is he's a freelance pilot. He does piloting runs for wealthy clients, but of course that job is gone. But he was also a very rough and tumble ex-Marine, has all sorts of survival skills, and is really unbeatable in physical combat. And the other major character is the bad guy, who decides very consciously to become the bad guy. He puts Sauron's a lidless eye on the flag that he drapes over the feudal castles that he immediately starts making people build. He becomes a kind of gang leader. Only in chainmail, he was a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, so he knows how to use swords and knives and axes and whatnot. And they are the woman, Lady Juniper, is on her own thing. She is essentially very peaceful, kind of a Galadriel parallel. But the two men are clearly headed for a confrontation. For book after book, you know they are headed for a confrontation, and it happens in this book. Meeting at Corvallis is where that confrontation happens. And I was reading these things all along. I love the series, and I was thinking, okay, sooner or later that fight is going to happen. And when it happens, I think I know what S.M. Sterling is going to make happen as a result of that, how that combat is going to come out. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong. He went for the gold at that meeting. Then we've got an older book. This is The Omnibus of Crime by Dorothy Sayers. Big 1,000-page thing. So it would work for March of the Mammoths. It would also work for March Mystery Madness. It is just her. She wrote an introductory essay and oversaw a gigantic collection of classic murder mysteries, everybody under the sun from her time. This is 100 years old. Immortalized in Raymond Chandler's The Simple Art of Murder, because he talks about this anthology when he's writing that essay. But it's also a terrific essay. It's harder and harder to find out in the wild, as Jason Harrigan would say. It's harder and harder to find this, but it is very much worth it. It's a wonderfully curated anthology. Then we have a work of great Victorian literature. I mention all the time on this channel that I think the Victorian era was one of the greatest outpourings of creativity in human history. Not just in relatively modern history, but ever. In terms of science or architecture or poetry or governance or literature. And the bounties of that literature are yours free on Project Gutenberg. Project Gutenberg has all of that has fallen out of copyright, so you can just go and download all of it if you want. And I did that, so I have a copy of Plutarch. This is his Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans. This is the translation by Arthur Hugh Clough, who was a fantastic poet, a fantastic classicist, and you just get his rolling, gorgeous prose throughout the whole of the book. And it's free. You can just download it at Project Gutenberg. The only bar here is that you have to be okay with ebooks. You have to be all right with reading on a screen. if you're okay with reading on a screen, then all of this is yours just to download for free. And there are better, more accurate translations of Plutarch than Arthur Hugh Clough, but there are hardly any that are more resonant, that are more pleasant to read. Same thing with Arthur Waley. His translation of the Tale of Genji is, of the 4 major English language translations of Tale of Genji, it is the least accurate, but it's a wonderful reading experience, wonderful Edwardian reading experience. Then we have Something for the Gaze. You gotta have something for the gaze. This is by Bradley Michael Donaghue. I don't know if I showed you this already. This is a thing called Point Danger. That starts out as a boy meets boy story in Australia, if I remember correctly. The main character meets a boy at a beach party, can't get him out of his mind, wants to throw some shrimp on his Barbie, and they eventually do that. But then it's a slight little thing, plot. A murky kind of threat of danger plot. It develops after that. I confess, not much of a confession because you're all guilty of it. Don't you try to say otherwise. I confess that I was drawn to the book just because it's a really neat cover. If I were to do self-published fiction of my own, I would want a cover as simple and engaging as this. But I did enjoy it. It just wasn't, it wasn't the be-all and end-all. Okay, all right, the next one is the be-all and end-all. All right, well, you don't know how these things are going to go. The next one is the be-all and end-all. This is The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. This is Tom Wright's gigantic tome. This ebook is the whole thing. The whole thing is 2,000 pages long. This is all about the resurrection. It's not just a look at the paper-thin accounts in the Gospels. It's also just, if you like this author, if you like N.T. Wright, then this is just him writing on and on and on. I love his prose. I could read it endlessly. So I don't care that his books tend to be over 1,000 pages long. I don't care at all. I naturally have a few reservations about this because he writes about it. I mean, I read Father Brown's book. He wrote a huge 2-volume thing on the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ a long time ago. And I read books like this with a great deal of interest, but it's spinning a whole necklace of pearls from a tiny grain of sand. This event did not happen and is not even recorded correctly. It does, even the recordings of it don't align in the tiny number of recordings that we have. So it's the foundation of Christianity, right? As St. Paul says, if the resurrection didn't happen, he was already dealing 2,000 years ago with questions that had been raised by other people, including sects of Christians that no longer exist, that he stamped out. He was already addressing the idea about whether or not this really happened. And he says, if the resurrection didn't happen, your faith is in vain. And the reason he is saying that, the reason he chose to write that, felt the need to do it, is because he knew there were sects of Christianity that didn't believe in the resurrection. And that they had to be dealt with. And believe me, he dealt with them. When you hear the story of Saul of Tarsus, who was a ruthless Roman soldier who persecuted the Christians, and then he was struck by a blinding white light on the road to Damascus. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And was converted on the spot to the most zealous Christian of them all, and started forming the basis of Christianity. Don't you think for a minute that means he stopped hunting Christians? He didn't. He hunted them. You can see it in the letters that he was forever snuffing out heresies, heretical sects, right there in the middle of the birth of Christianity. But precious little of that is in this book. Instead, this is just, I hesitate to call it Tom Wright's theology. I'm not sure what he's doing here. Fan fiction would be the irreverent term for it. But it's fantastic. If you like his prose style, he's written a lot of short books as well, I should say. So if you want to find out whether or not you like his prose, whether or not he's a Christian author, former bishop of Durham, if you are looking for a Christian author and you'd like one who's written a lot of stuff, but sometimes the prose style is a little bit preachy, no pun intended, or a little bit saccharine, or a little bit condescending. A lot of Christian writers are very condescending, especially to their fellow Christians. If you are a Christian reader or interested in reading Christian stuff and you want an author who doesn't do that, this author doesn't do that. I could read him endlessly. And he has shorter books, so that you can sample that on your own without sinking in the 10 years necessary to read The Resurrection of the Son of God or Paul and the Faithfulness of God. And then I think this is our last one. No, it isn't. We'll keep going here just a bit longer. This next one is by Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson. This is not out yet. I believe this is a forthcoming book. This is Sands of Dune. And we have Never Turn Your Back on a Sandworm. But this is Sands of Dune, but it's a collection of novellas, backstories, little filling in of stories, the type of thing that Brian Herbert has been doing now for 15 years with his father's works. I don't approve. I don't like it at all. I don't like the cynical efforts on the part of the publisher to intentionally design these things so that the reader who is new to this world sees no difference between Brian Herbert's fan fiction, his pastiches, and his father's original books. They are designed very much to look like it's all Dune. It is not all Dune. I have never been anything but disappointed by Brian Herbert's elaborations of his father's work. Like, for instance, and I haven't read this thing yet, but one of the novellas in here is the backstory of Shadout Mapes, a character from Dune that some of you will remember, who is very interesting. There's an interesting scene between her and the Lady Jessica at the beginning of the Atreides' very brief occupation of Dune. We get her whole story and how she came upon that revered name and whatnot. And there are a couple of other novellas in here as well. Maybe they will please me. They haven't usually, but maybe they will. I think this is the last one. Yes. Okay, this is the first book in a series. It's on my Kindle. I've read all of the books in this series. This is the Lukoi series by Iris Foxglove, who is, I believe, a writing team. This is Winter of the Owl. And this is also for the gays, but maybe for their older brothers. Because this particular book is about a seasoned leathery hunter who has built his dream house out on the edge of the wilderness with his lover, and then the lover dies. And in the early part of the book, a willowy, obviously not leathery and seasoned person, a man is thrown upon the mercy of his shelter, and they very grudgingly start a relationship. And you might think, okay, well, it's a fantasy setting. This is a fantasy series, and some of the world building is well done. You might think, all right, well, that sounds fairly ordinary, but it leaves the groves of ordinary. All of these novels do at one point or another. You just have to be, I mean, there are gay readers and there are gay readers. You have to be a little bit on the adventurous side, I would say, for these. If you are, I think you'll be pleased. I think this is a perfect example of what I always talk about on this channel, which is the first book in a series that does what it's supposed to do. I think I got this as a special. Indie authors are forever having specials where they will give you the first book free, or the first 3 at a really reduced price, specifically in order to simply say there's no trickery involved. What they're saying is, I want to give you a reason to sample my work. I think my work will please you. I put a lot of work into it. I think it will please you, and I want you to have an incentive to sample it. That's all. I will rest on that. I can do the rest. Just give me the chance, and I will do the rest. At least that's the word that I put into the indie author's mouth when I'm encountering this. I've encountered it a million times, where Amazon will offer me book 1 in a series for free, and I will always say the same thing. All right, Iris Foxglove, or whoever it is, Souls and Alchemy, the earlier thing that we saw, or whatever it is, I will always say the same thing. All right, I will read your book. I read much faster than an ordinary reader does. I have the time. I will read your book, or your first sample chapter, or whatever. But it is up to you, completely. If you write the first book in your fantasy series and you think, well, I won't resolve anything here because I'm going to write this over 5 or 6 books, so I don't need to make this first one enjoyable on its own, don't expect me to come back. Don't expect me to buy the next book. And it's not the case here. I finished this first book and liked it enough to buy the next one, and then the next one. And that's happened a lot of times with indie authors. That's the yardstick that I hold them to. I imagine, as unthinkable as it is, that I would hold mainstream authors to that standard as well if I had to pay for their books. I don't, so I will hoover up any garbage that they come out with. But if I had to, or maybe if it was time and effort to get it at the library, then I would hold them to that standard. authors should have to sing for their supper. They shouldn't be arrogantly assuming they have your attention. And there's none of that here. You just have to beware of what goes on in that little dream house. That's all. So there you go. That is the revenge of what lurks on my Kindle tag. And I am hereby tagging all of you who have booktube channels and do any e-reading. You know as well as I do that if you do e-reading, your Kindle or your Kobo or your iPad has accumulated stuff. It's just, I've never known anyone where that didn't happen. You know that that's happening. It's not just Sarah at the Bookish Knitter, and it's not just me, and it's not just Michael K. Vaughan, and it's not just CriminOlly. It's all of you. So show it to me. Do this tag and show it to me. All right? Doesn't have to be a Kindle. It doesn't have to be a new book. It can be popular domain. I showed you Plutarch. In fact, as a parting shot, just because we really want to, let's take another look at that Plutarch. A lovely edition, don't you think? Leatherbound? I wish. That's all you have to do. You don't have to have a cute dog in the background. You don't have to be a super sexy influencer on your own. You just have to show me what's on your Kindle. Don't make me come over there. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.